you can write what you think is the ideal rule for the one and done, two and done coming out of high school. If I gave you that autonomy, how would you do it that you think is the right way to go with how we have these kids coming into college or coming into the NBA?
Yeah, and another very fair question. So if you'd asked me that a year ago, I would have said if I didn't have to negotiate this with the union, I would raise the minimum age to 20 from 19. And of course, it was in 2004. 18, and we collectively bargained with the union, raise it to 19, but they've historically opposed going to 20. My view has changed, and I don't have a great answer, but the reason my view has changed is, for example, I've talked about this before. If you look at that Ben Simmons documentary about what his year was like in school at LSU, and no knock on LSU, but he's a bright young man. He was saying, I'm only here because I'm being forced to defer going to the NBA for a year, and NCAA tournament didn't seem all that important to him, and it may ultimately have been a lost year in his development because he's not fully engaged in school, he's not fully engaged in basketball, in part because of very understandable NCAA regulations on how often coaches can interact with their teams, limitations in the summer, et cetera. And then I look at some of the players coming in internationally who are becoming full-time professional basketball players, as we see in global soccer at 16 years old, and they're on in some cases, a better development program, and also a more holistic one, even in terms of injury prevention and better monitoring of everything they're doing and better control over them. So where does that leave me? To me, it's no longer an issue of whether we go from 19 to 18 or 19 to 20. I think it means that we as the NBA have to do something we've historically avoided, which is getting more involved in youth basketball. And if you sit with the folks from Nike or Under Armour or Adidas, they can tell you who the top 100 14-year-olds are in the world. And there's a fairly close correlation between the top 100 at 14 and the top 100 at 18.
But is it back on the table, though, that kids are going to be able to come out of high school right to the NBA? Is that a possible option here?
It's a possible option. It's on the table. I would add into the mix, though, what is, our development league, now known as the G League, going forward. I think that creates an opportunity as well, and maybe that becomes an alternative. Right now, you can go into our development league at 18. We don't talk about that a lot because I think for most of the top young men, college, even if all you care about is basketball and you're not focused on your education, college still seems to be a better alternative for them in getting the exposure and getting the development in these great programs. And by the way, I don't mean to diminish in any way their need for education, but just being a realist here, that they're not even, a lot of them aren't even spending a full 1 year in college, and their entire focus is becoming an NBA player. So that question becomes, if we allow players to get drafted at 18, do they go first into our G League? Do some portion of the players go directly into our G League? That's why I'm just being honest. I don't have a secret plan in the drawer. I think but my thinking has evolved on this subject, and I think it's something that even before we sit back down with the union, you're right, the fair question from the union could be, what is it that you want? Before we even start negotiating. And right now, we have our competition committee focused on it. We have an owners meeting in July. We're looking at a lot of the data in terms of sort of injuries. I'm hearing from team orthopedics now who've been around the league for a long time. They're seeing wear and tear injuries among 19 and 20-year-olds that they used to see among 28 and 29-year-olds. And I think that's also a function. In part, not all AAU is bad, but in many cases, these young men are playing or teenagers are playing far too many games, where I've said it before, there's a pitch count in Little League, but in basketball, you often have kids playing 8 games in a weekend, and there's no incentive to raise their hand and say, my knee's swollen or sore or my ankle hurts, because every game seemingly is important in terms of college scouting.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.